what is it that I do today that's going to affect my business in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, not just in the next couple quarters.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And Elliot tells a story today of a phenomenon. I won't spoil it, but it has to do with Christmas tree farms and something that happened a decade ago. But it really gets into some, this great time of year to be thinking about planning and how far out you think and how you structure those thoughts. So it worked out really nicely along those lines. And so before we jump into that story, I personally think, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but if you were buying any sorts of gifts for any sort of holiday this December, I think that a really great gift would be to tell a friend about So Here's My Story podcast.
That would be a great
Wouldn't
gift.
that be a lovely gift?
That's
Perfect
amazing.
stocking stuffer.
I was thinking the same thing.
That and join the Facebook group.
So here's my story. As you know, I live in rural Pennsylvania.
Yes.
A lot of farmland, a lot of cows.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not hard to find a Christmas tree farm.
Fair enough.
And Nikki, for years, we had an artificial tree. Nikki has, for the past couple of years, wanted a real tree. And so we've gone to this one particular Christmas tree farm. And I noticed that it was not a little bit, but noticeably more sparse. There were slimmer pickings this year. And so I was talking to the guy who runs the farm, and he said, well,
the tree man,
the tree guy,
The tree
everybody
dude.
has a guy. We have a guy. So the tree guy. And he said, well, it is slim pickings this year. It's because of the recession.
Wait.
Yeah, the recession. And I thought, did I miss a recession? I didn't think
I know
there was
I've been
a recession.
busy, but
So
you mean the upcoming recession?
Well,
Or
that's what I
is
thought.
he
And I
forecasting?
I almost didn't ask because I didn't want to sound stupid, but
Right.
that's really never been one of my problems. So I said,
Forge ahead.
Well, forge ahead. So I said, what recession? He said, well, the 2007, 2008 recession.
Oh,
Do you not remember that? I said, yeah, I remember that, but that's like 11 years ago.
right. Oh.
And so he said, yeah. I said, well, why,
Oh my goodness.
why is that? And so what he explained, which is where you already are,
Yeah.
is the life cycle of their business is such that if they couldn't afford to get as many saplings or whatever it
Seeds or
is
whatever, yeah.
in 2007, 2008, that meant flash forward to 2019, they're going to have a shortage.
Oh my goodness.
And I was intrigued by this because of, you normally see ripple effects. If I don't do marketing in the second and third quarter of 2018, then my first and second quarter of 2019
Right.
is going to suffer. I'm not going to have as much in the pipeline, et cetera.
Like the sine wave of that. I make the international sign for sine wave.
Correct. Yes. But this is an 11-year cycle.
Cliff.
It's a cliff.
That you can see coming a decade away.
Yes. And so, yes, I had questions. Of course, I didn't want to monopolize the conversation, let alone make him feel like I was judging him in some way.
So I am just to clue our listeners in, and also Elliot, so he doesn't think I'm ignoring him. I'm Googling this because some of my questions are, did this guy have a problem and he made, could he have done it?
Right,
Was he just I guess I'll have a problem?
Yes.
Or is this actually like a thing, like a broader thing?
Right.
So
And I haven't looked this up. And so part of me, and as I was saying, I didn't want to make him feel like I was judging him, but I'm thinking,
but you were.
I don't know that business.
Right,
So
exactly.
if you know that there is something bad coming in 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
is it like you're a train on a track where trains don't swerve, so you can't possibly avoid it?
It is what it is.
It is what it is, and you've just got to batten the hatches and deal with it. Or did he fail to do something? Is this isolated to him?
Well, apparently not, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh.
There's an entire page here about the 2019 Christmas tree shortage that harkens back to the recession.
Really?
Yes. Now, it's interesting. It's a little more involved than just straight that, because apparently the weather has also played into it as well. They haven't grown as quickly or whatever. Yeah. But there is a whole bunch of articles here. In fact, just yesterday, WHYY did an article on the Christmas tree shortages because of what went on in the Great Recession. But two other things, people were spending less, so they bought less trees.
Yeah.
And then there's a very interesting ripple here. Whenever you have a shortage, because this then speaks to like future ripples as well. Whenever there's a shortage and people can't find a tree and they go buy an artificial one, you've now lost them for
You've lost them for at least,
I won't say forever,
for
but
years.
for a great deal of time. Oh my gosh, I feel so much tension and anxiety for this Christmas tree industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, because that's just an amazingly difficult industry to have a 10-year sine wave, so.
And it means that prices are way up because they're going to run out in the first week or two.
Right. And so that's what we found, that the pickings were really slim. And it's kind of like the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
So
10, because I think the guy said the word recession and you didn't even immediately, if he'd said the word recession in 2011, 12, you'd been like, I know exactly what the problem is. But it is far enough back in your, encyclopedic memory that you're like, wait, what recession? Like the one in, this one or that one. So that is fascinating and so he has not stepped out of that sine wave until now.
No, and and so I started thinking about the butterfly effect. What is it that I do today that's going to affect my business in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, not just in the next couple quarters? And I did think, when he mentioned the recession, I did think about one thing, and that is during the recession, as we've talked about before, I'm very slow to pull the trigger on letting people go.
Sure.
So during the recession, I held on to people way longer than I really should have, because all of our bank business fell off, our real estate business fell off, et cetera, because of the way the economy was running. So I had a way more payroll than I did, and I went deep into lines of credit. And so that decision from 2007, 2008 was following me to 2014, 2015, when I finally paid off the lines of credit and everything like that. So there were things relatively recently that I will look back and say, yeah, had I made a different decision in 2007, 2008, I would be farther ahead in 2016.
Well, you would in theory, although this is why I think projecting these kinds of things can get so complicated sometimes is the other thing that would be very difficult to quantify, but that is absolutely true, is because you didn't have those layoffs, you still have a seasoned, steeped in your culture, dedicated staff. Like you haven't also been trying to rebuild with new people since then, which is
no, that's true. But there were certain people that I let go 2 years too late.
Gotcha. Yeah, fair enough.
So I did dig in, and I was just curious about that particular breed of decision making that has long-term ripple effects. And what is it in my business or in any of the listeners' businesses that would enable them to look forward that far into the future and say, yep, this is coming?
So there's a couple different things happening here, I think. I don't know, because that's different than what happened to the Christmas tree folks. That hit them. A thing happened, and they knew that it would cause a pothole 10 or 11 years out.
Right.
Which, according to that article, apparently this shortage started partly also because of the weather. Like 2 to 3 years ago, it started to show up. That's where some of those trees would have started to happen. And now it's really hitting hard at this point. So that's a thing that happens that you see coming. Sort of my flip side of this is a frustration sometimes with businesses or divisions or whatever who want to have like a 5 or an 8 year plan or something, because Lord knows where the economy is going to be, where what industries are going to pop up, what industries are going to go away. Like I think it's really hard to, in any meticulous kind of way, plan that far out. And yet the interesting thing is, and I'm cheating a tiny bit here because I looked at that article, but some of the ways that they are sort of working on that, I see a hole coming, what can I do about it, is to expand the agriculture, what's it called? Not agriculture, agritainment, the
entertainment value,
the wraparound services. Yes. So they're selling more wreaths, they're selling more hot cocoa,
the add-ons and that sort of thing. Sure,
the extra stuff that happens there to supplement. So that is one conversation of like, when you know that there is a cliff of some kind coming, and I think we actually even did an episode on this. Like, what would you do if you had to go make X $1,000 in your business today?
Yeah.
Like, what are your fill in the gap modalities to deal with a thing far ahead? But back to your question, I mean, have you posed that question to yourself? Can you see that far out?
I can't see that far out, but I have posed the question that you posed, which is, what if the bottom dropped out of our primary source of income? So in 2007, 2008, we represented a lot of banks. And so we would do their closing documents as lenders counsel, and the bottom dropped out of that market because banks weren't lending because the real estate wasn't getting the valuations. And so we had a rough go of it. So I was thankful that I had a line of credit and I got it when I didn't need it, so that was fine. But I started thinking about, if I lost some of my major clients, or I just didn't do this kind of work. Let's say I do a lot of construction, as you know. And so let's say that there was a recession and people just weren't building. There was no commercial projects, and infrastructure and government spending just dried up. I would take a hit on my income as well as those companies that are no longer doing the work. So what would I do? So some of the things that I'm looking at are the online course that I've talked about, or different ways to bring in income that people would find more attractive when they didn't have the money to spend on one-on-one services.
Yep.
Right.
Well, I just had a brainstorm that if I knew what I now know about the Christmas tree industry, and some of the things we were just reading about, it kind of interesting. If you really wanted to be clever, you could, in theory, and I don't know that the economics of this work out, but what if you were a Christmas tree place that, knowing that you were going to have a shortage, had like a supply of artificial ones that you would give the person for, like, you could rent it for the year and then come back, return it, and get like a discount on your next tree or something. Because the thing that really made my eyes open about that is the terror of, it's one thing to lose a person for a year, but if losing them for a year means you now may lose them for the next 5 to 7 years, that means this recession that you are dealing with now is actually it's not just a bump in the road. It could be a whole chasm for you in your industry. But to your point, it comes back to that diversification piece of, it's such a cliche, but not having all your eggs in one particularly size, shape, flavor of basket. Yeah,
but I do like your idea for the Christmas tree industry, which is addressing the immediate need of your customers. Or I'm sorry, not even immediate. Anticipating the needs that your customers are going to have when this thing, whatever it is, hits. And their need is going to be an affordable tree during a time when affordable trees are not to be found.
Yep.
Right? So how do you do that without losing the customer? You can either go out somewhere and try and find affordable trees and corner the market, which is a really cash rich and impractical suggestion, or you can figure out what would give them the next best thing. And so it's that kind of business strategy. Like, same thing with the entertainment, turning it into an experience, the wreaths and the hot chocolate and maybe a visit from Santa, and you have a live reindeer there for whatever. And, you have certain
still Rudolph
things to do. And for me, it's diversifying a little bit, diversifying what the services are. But I'm just interested in what I can clearly see what that thing would be to my business. It would be another recession where construction stopped. And I've asked myself, how am I going to replace that income? And what investments do I have to make today? One of the things that we have talked about, I think, 2 episodes ago, I really should have a chart. 2 episodes ago, we talked about the construction of the podcast studio and the studio for the online courses that I'm building in my office. Well, that's something I'm doing now. The recession hasn't hit. There is no recession, but I want to be up and running and be well equipped to produce product that I can sell as an income stream if the recession comes in a year, 2 years, 3 years.
So you bring up another point here that I think is really important, and that is that, because we're talking about the butterfly effect as if we can somehow predict. Like, I don't know that the value of this conversation is in its predictive qualities as much as the what not to be surprised by. qualities.
Right.
You know, a couple reasons. One, there will be some form, you know, to varying degrees, it's hard to say, of some kind of recession again. And often it does hit the construction industry. So if we were making like a what not to do podcast here, it's not wait around till it happens and then be shocked, because you may not be able to predict when or how bad it will be or how long it will last or some of these other things. But you can know that that is a very likely scenario for which you should have a plan, and not one that you start trying to address right then. It's something that you have to plan ahead for. Whereas like having a plan for a tsunami coming through, you know, less likely.
No, but there are certain things. It doesn't even have to be a pothole. So for example, if I thought that due to a lot of deregulations and certain things happening economically, much smaller businesses were going to be doing business internationally. Mm-hmm. That it's not really solely the purview of the Exxons of the world or whatever, but even much smaller businesses that would fall into my client base would be doing business internationally. I'm not equipped as an international lawyer. Mm-hmm. I don't know the ins and outs of the Patriot Act and some of the rules and regulations. I know just enough to be dangerous, so I would never hold myself out as somebody who's an expert in international legal regulation. But if I knew that that was the trend, if I really thought that was the trend, I'd have to get somebody in here now, put them on payroll for quite a while they're not earning their keep, just so I'm equipped to handle that flood of business, because otherwise I may find clients leaving me because they really need somebody who knows international, and I can't serve as general counsel anymore.
Yeah, I was just listening to a very short little snippet of a podcast this morning where Seth Godin was talking about really successful companies, you know, putting like everything on red 32. You know, that you have to make a bet for things that you think are coming down the pike, and then if you're wrong, you lose, but if you're right, you cash in, and that the unwillingness to do that is how, you know, you sort of stay in that tepid middle ground where you're sort of the something for everyone, or, you know, it's really not clear where you're going. Like what you're not trying to do, and what is not advisable, I don't think, is having a lawyer for everything. You know, you're not bringing on a divorce lawyer and you know, and an international lawyer
and an estate lawyer and then a securities lawyer and all that stuff. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think it's so interesting because I find planning, and this is a great topic for this time of year because so many people want to plan 2020 or those kinds of things. I have such a like love-hate relationship with planning because sometimes I think it's really important to scan out into the future and say, what do I want more of? What do I want less of? What matters to me? Danielle Laporte has an interesting program. The program itself doesn't really get me going, but just this basic concept of how do you, instead of thinking about actions, just saying, how do I want to feel this time next year, and then backtracking it from there, because we often plan goals from sort of the gap, like a scarcity, like I need to be thinner, be fitter, have more money, have more of this, whatever. When if what you really want to do is feel a certain way, that may or may not involve those methodologies to get there. But so that kind of planning, I think, and taking stock and checking in is super important. I get a little curmudgeonly about it when it seems to be structured on some perception that we can predict the future to a really specific degree. I have a friend who works at a company where they're expected to project very exacting sales goals and delivery goals and whatnot, like 18 months out. In, you know, June of 2021,
wow.
what will your, you know, ROI on this be? And I sometimes I'm like, is that just because my mind doesn't work that way? I'm like, no, that's because that's ridiculous. You can't possibly know accurately. That's the difference, I think, is the further out, the more you have to leave flexibility for unexpected things versus the sooner you are, you're held to a higher accuracy standpoint.
Right. But I think that what you had said, which was looking at the emotion, how you want to feel. So I look at it as 3 questions when I plan, and not 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, but just in terms of my business. I look at what calls do I want to get, what calls do I think I'll get, and what calls am I afraid I'm going to get. right?
I'm not going to ask which list.
Right. Well, Jody's on all three, ironically enough. But no, so the calls that I'm...
So say that again. What calls you want to get? Mm-hmm.
What kind of calls I think I'll get, and what kind of calls I'm afraid I'm going to get. Mm-hmm. So right now, for example, just a snapshot right now, one of the calls I'm afraid that I would get is a call from a really good client telling me that they've got a project they really need me for that's going to absorb my attention full time for months. I don't have the bandwidth for that.
Right.
And I do have, so if I'm thankful that right now today, I don't have a huge trial that's really going to focus me, while at the same time, sometimes that's great. It can do great things for the bottom line.
Sure.
Not necessarily the clients, but it can do great things for the bottom line. But I don't want that call because I don't have the bandwidth right now to deal with it. The kind of calls I want to get are those that go beyond, hey, can you help us with this one project? I want to get the calls where I get introduced to more of the team, and whether I'm giving a workshop or whether I am just coming in to answer questions every once in a while, and the everything you wanted to know about whatever, contracts or construction or whatever, but we're afraid to ask, or just kind of continuing education. I want to get the calls where people say, we really want our people to be better at what they do. Let's bring Elliot in to help with that.
Right.
And the calls that I think I'll get are generally some of that, but a lot of the one-off, hey, here's a contract. Hey, we need to collect money, or we're being sued, or we have this HR issue or whatever. And that's great. That's my bread and butter. That's the one-off. But if I don't know the calls that really get me excited, that I want to get, then I'm not going to ever take any intentional action that's going to go towards them. And if I don't take intentional action now, then they're not going to come in a year from now, because I have a long sales cycle as a lawyer.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, and I think I particularly love that you, and I don't even think you did this intentionally, but that meme is constantly going around right now. I think we may have even mentioned it, maybe not though, of for a while it's been like, there's 5 or 6 or whatever, some amount of time left in this year, but also this decade. There's a lot of sort of focus on like, this is the end of the decade.
Right.
And so it's really interesting that you actually brought a story of someone who a decade ago knew what they were going to have to be thinking about a decade from now. And it's so interesting. It makes me wish I could like snap my fingers and insta pan through data of like Christmas tree places, who used that time really creatively, who just sort of like bah humbugged and socked away cash as they had it to get through this. Because that's one way to get through a thing is to just, brace yourself, batten the hatches, store up supplies, whatever, and just get through it. Other people, it like elicits a creativity response. They're like, ooh, we could do this. We could have like free artificial tree rental for a year, and, like coupon for this.
And some people are like, 2019, that'll never get here.
Exactly.
But one thing I do want to mention, by the way, is that you pointed out that in the next couple of days, we're coming upon Pretend to be a Time Traveler Day.
That is true. That is true. December 8th is Pretend to be a Time Traveler Day.
I just can't help but reflect back that if you had done that successfully, you could have helped the Christmas tree guy.
Damn it.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything,
including wrangling us, which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.